Hi, Todd Feinburg. It's After 6. Joining us every week on After 6 is Rob Sampson. He's a senator. He's from Wolcott. He is a ideological character. That word gets thrown around like it's a bad thing, but it means he has principles and a belief system, and he is consistent with those. So I find him wonderful for that. Rob, how are you, sir?
I am wonderful. Thank you for the great intro.
Well, you know, it's the truth. Might as well say it. There isn't much in terms of principles, I think, in politics these days. And it's such a nice thing because it provides an intellectual framework so everybody can understand what you think and what you vote for.
I can't imagine why anyone would be anything else. I don't know how you even do this job without having a core set of values. But it is true. I watch some of my colleagues, sadly in both parties, who seem to have to really dig deep to find out where they stand on a lot of issues, and I don't get that because it's automatic for me. Is this going to infringe on someone's rights? Is this going to expand government unnecessarily? I mean, these are the things I ask myself.
So let's talk about Republican politics a little bit to start off. Where do you see Republicans in the state right now with a weakened presence in the legislature, with a governor's seat not picked up, but instead in the hands of Ned Lamont? Paint a picture for us.
Well, I would say that there's a big divide in the Republican Party today. I think there is a portion of the Republican elected officials that want us to maintain our values and principles and fight, and we're trying to make sure our message gets out there because we believe that, the message of America is essentially the Republican message, freedom and opportunity, creating prosperity, and we want to sell that to the people as much as possible as our alternative to what Ned Lamont and the Democrats offer. But there are plenty of Republicans that I think are fearful of that, and you can see that certainly when it comes to elections. And it's because I think a lot of people believe that Republicans can't win in Connecticut, that, they're convinced that this is just a blue state and there's no way you're going to be able to convince enough people to vote for a Republican message. And I think that's a shame because I think it is a winning message.
Well, if there's any lesson of the last election, it's that voters respond to a message of them getting what they want. And there is roughly half the population in the state of Connecticut that I think responds to a rational pitch about balancing the budget, about not having endless taxation. It's actually more than that. There's no question that there are people who vote for Democrats. I get calls all the time from people who vote for Democrats but don't support the state of the state right now.
Right. Oh, the Democrats have very cleverly managed to get the votes of all of these different constituency groups, despite the fact that many of the people that fall into those categories don't agree with their platform in its entirety or even the majority of the things that they do. I think you have a lot of state employees, you have teachers. These people are concerned about their own future, maintaining their job, their pension benefits, whatever it is, and they feel like the Democrats are the only ones looking out for them, which I would argue is not true in most cases, but the Democrats are very clever at making sure that people perceive that they're the only protectors. And there's other groups, too. I mean, whether it's identity groups, whether it's people in the gay community or minorities, this and that, there is a perception among different groups and categories of people, which I cannot stand because I don't like to put people into categories or groups. That's not what this country is about. The greatest minority is the individual, and the country was founded on the principle of protecting the rights of the individual. And to me, that's what the Republican Party does, too, which is also, Todd, coincidentally, why we do bad when it comes to these policies, because, the Democrats will put forward some bill allegedly to benefit women or some other group that they've categorized people into. And, of course, Republicans reject it because we're not going to write policy that's specific to any certain population. And, of course, the Democrats very cleverly exploit that.
Yes, well, they have this wonderful compassion narrative that is powerful because it isn't connected to the actual issues. And it allows them to have an overlay that allows voters who fall for that messaging to ignore the realities of what's at play in a certain policy fight. And I think Republicans miss their opportunity by not talking about our constitutional model, what liberty is all about, and what that means. I've been taking a class on the Constitution online from Hillsdale College, and it's so inspiring to hear somebody who knows the Constitution inside out articulating the values that underpin it, and also what a revolutionary moment it was for the world when America came along and put this thing into effect. And liberals used to believe in those Enlightenment values that drove the founders, and now they're actually on the other side of it. They're for big oppressive government rather than for liberty.
Right. Well, first thing I would say is those Hillsdale classes are excellent. Larry Arnn is very, very articulate, and I think it's great that they have taken it upon themselves to try and help educate the world. My first contact with Hillsdale was maybe a decade or so ago when they had a real push to provide free copies, little pocket copies of the Declaration and the Constitution. And it seems like they've only expanded their effort to try and inform the electorate, which is the thing that we're missing more than anything. And I've said over and over again, and I'm sure we've talked about it before, that I think the Democratic Party has essentially left the plantation, or left the that's the wrong word, the farm, as far as believing in American core principles and values. And of course, I'm not speaking about people on the street who identify as Democrats, but elected officials, the Bernie Sanders of the world, even the. What's funny is I'm watching the news, and it looks like people are considering Nancy Pelosi to be a moderate today, which just blows me away. But she's as socialist as the rest of them. She may not be as outspoken as AOC or Bernie Sanders, but they all believe in the same core principles, which is that we're going to put the government in power to redistribute wealth and control every aspect of our lives. These are the exact opposite of the principles that made America great and prosperous.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons I'm excited about this period and about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is that I think the difference between Nancy Pelosi and this new crowd of congressmen like her is that, like Ocasio-Cortez, is that there is a vehemence in the young people in the way they advocate for socialism. They're not bashful about showing contempt for the American system of government. And that's what makes Nancy Pelosi uncomfortable. The old model has always been that you don't confess what you're actually after.
Right.
On the left. You don't demonstrate clearly for people what the end point is, because nobody would ever vote for the end point up front. It has to be that analogy about the boiling frog that gets you there.
You're absolutely right. I mean, they used to, even just in my own short political career, the idea that people would actually come out and call themselves socialists or to advocate for policies based on the notion of socialism is just shocking to me. And it's all over the place now. What's funny to me is every once in a while I will speak to a Democrat supporter who will get mad at me for using the term. And I'm like, no, I'm quoting them.
Right.
And even they can't.
I'm not being disparaging. I'm telling you what they say about themselves.
Exactly.
Rob Sampson is our guest. He's a newly elected state senator, having moved over from the other side of the building. And you talked about talking with constituents. You're doing a lot of that lately, aren't you?
Oh, yes. I've had a couple of legislative forums. I know a number of my colleagues are out trying to stir up some, public support to fight against the tolls that have been proposed by the governor. So there'll be probably your listeners should keep an eye out. There's going to be forums all across the state held by Republican legislators. I'm going to be doing 3 of those, certainly in the town of Southington, Cheshire, and Waterbury. They'll probably come sometime at the end of March. I don't have any dates yet, but keep an eye out for that.
Besides the
be
tolls,
informed.
is there anything that constituents are really showing concern about in all of these scary proposals from the big government spend endlessly, tax endlessly crowd?
I would say one of the biggest issues that I think people, at least in my district, are upset about is the proposed forced regionalization of school districts, which people should understand is a terrible, terrible policy. On the surface, it's going to be sold to people as if there's going to be savings because we're going to be combining administrations and that sort of thing. That's not what they're doing. That's not what they're up to. Me personally, I'm a small government guy. If two towns, neighboring towns, want to get together to combine forces to save money on the purchase of goods or services, I think that's great. They should be allowed to do so. This is something totally different. This is going to be a forced regionalization for the purpose of using the dollars, the tax dollars from well-run small towns to help prop up the urban centers that they are near to. Wolcott is near Waterbury, for instance, or the surrounding towns of New Haven and Hartford, who are actually doing a good job with their resources. Essentially, this is a way to combine the money to help prop up the cities, and it's very, very bad. There's a hearing at the state capitol this Friday at 1 p.m. On the regionalization legislation that's been proposed. I urge as many people as possible to submit testimony or go up there and tell them that you are against this.
Oh, this is one of the most insidious things. I don't think you're making it sound quite as horrible as what it is. It is, I think, an attempt to get rid of towns that don't fall naturally into the constituency of the left, which uses taxpayer dollars to secure its votes. And it does that in part by funneling tons of money paid in by the suburbs into the urban areas to take care of the people who live there, because cities are not sustainable things. They require a huge influx of state and federal dollars. So if you can take down the lines, at least in some parts of the government in a suburb, it seems to me what this is all about is to, if you're, say, merging a school system from a successful suburb, you're pillaging that money, but you're also pillaging the idea that that town gets to have its own schools anymore. Suddenly,
That's
those
exactly
kids are
right,
going
sir.
to urban schools.
Yes, those schools will lose their autonomy to make their own decisions about how that school district is run, what the curriculum is, everything else. And you're absolutely right. It's all part of the master plan. The Democrats have been very successful at exploiting the needs of the cities in our state, and I think they see this as a way to expand the reach of that type of policy making. You also hear about the car tax. They want to do away with the car tax statewide. And of course, that sounds appealing to a lot of people out there, except they need to realize that they're not doing away with taxing you. They're just going to tax you more on something else, like your house, for instance. And this is a way to essentially pillage, as you said, the small towns for even more property tax dollars in the form of, homeowners taxes versus car taxes.
We're talking to Rob Sampson, state senator. So I'm confused by what you just said. I thought the idea was to convert the car tax convert the flow of dollars to the state from municipalities.
Yeah, well, there's a combination of factors involved in changing the way property taxes are charged, allowing towns to create their own types of property tax systems. All of it is designed to give the state government more dollars to redistribute, though.
And also perhaps to change the balance of burden between the state and the cities and towns. Is that right?
Got it. Yes, of course. I mean, that's their goal in every way, shape, and form is more government control. And
but it's also covering up whose responsibility it's forcing the towns to pay the tab. It's like this idea of shifting the payment of the teachers' retirement the pensions. If the towns are suddenly kicking in 25% of that, that is, for that gross amount of money across the state, relieving the state of the burden that it's accrued.
Right. And that's the only reason why they're talking about doing it, because, Governor Lamont and the Democrats are going to need to balance a budget some way, shape, or form, at least on paper. And they're looking for dollars any way they can, and that's a way that they can make a clever argument that towns ought to be responsible for what they've done on their own. And in theory, it's hard to disagree with, but the fact of the matter is that this is the way it's been done for a long time. Any resources that you take away from those local communities are going to have to be made up by increasing local property taxes. It's sneaky, and it's a way for the state to say they didn't raise your taxes, but essentially they put the town in a position where they have no choice but to do it.
Yeah. So what did you say about, what were you referring to when you said in principle it looks good?
Well, I mean, I think that the idea of local boards of education being able to make their own decisions about how they compensate teachers, including their pensions and benefits, is a good idea, and it would actually make them much more accountable to how much they pay them and what those benefits are. Mm-hmm. But they don't have that power currently. That power is controlled in large measure by the state, and that's why the state also takes money from the towns and sends it back to them in a way to pay that money back.
All right, Rob, what's going on with term limits?
There is a couple of bills before the legislature on term limits. It's complicated, though, because we don't have the ability to affect congressional term limits. That's something that would have to happen in Congress, obviously. But there is a movement out there, something called the Article 5 movement, which is a little-known provision in the U.S. Constitution that would say that the states get to actually pass constitutional amendments, and that's the mechanism by which folks want to see this happen. They want an Article 5 convention to take place, Connecticut to participate, and for term limits to be the topic that we send our representatives go to fight for.
Okay, so that's sort of playing around on the edges of legal technicalities, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, the Article 5 convention is a real thing. It's been in our Constitution since the very, very beginning. But here it is, hundreds of years later, and we still have not tried it. And I think the reason for that is that there are many people who are concerned that if you actually did begin a new constitutional convention, which is what this would create, it couldn't be limited to just a couple of topics. It could end up being a situation where the entire Constitution could be rewritten. And you've got advocates on both the right and left for a constitutional convention or an Article 5 convention. On the right, you have people looking for term limits and balanced budget amendment, for instance. And on the left, the thing I hear most often is to change the policy that gave us Citizens United.
Okay, and we've got about a minute and a half left. Can you give us a quick look at gun control?
Yes, there's a number of gun control bills that are going to be before the legislature. I expect to see public hearings begin on that sometime in the first week or two of March. There are bills regarding the safe storage of firearms in homes as a result of tragedy that happened earlier this year. There's going to be a bill about safe storage in cars. There's also a lot of terrible, terrible legislation banning ghost guns and further impugning the rights of Connecticut citizens to keep and bear arms. It's shocking to me, Todd, because we have some of the most stringent gun control laws in the entire country, but they just keep going. They want more and more all the time, but they don't want to address the real problem, which is that there are illegal guns on the street. There are illegal aliens, MS-13 gang members, causing crime in our major cities. The issue
even in Connecticut, is that happening?
Oh, yes, it is. Absolutely. There's no question about it.
Really? I haven't heard any talk about that, and I haven't thought to ask.
I will do my best to try and come up with some data for you.
That's fascinating. Because
we can certainly talk about it.
That's a really powerful argument, or kind of a slap in the face to wake people up to that there is legitimate cause and effect for the state and potential benefit in cracking down on the celebration of people in the country illegally. All right, Rob Sampson, good to talk with you, sir. Always good to talk with you. Thanks for filling us in. We'll talk to you next week.
Can't wait. That's
Senator Rob Sampson on After 6. Stay with us. We've got news coming up, and then Clark Howard on WTIC News Talk 1080. I see News Talk 1080.